This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly. This University of Southern Indiana live streaming event will begin shortly.
As folks are streaming in, well, thank you all for coming. And looks like the rain gods have been kind to us and made it possible for you to be here. So thank you. And thank you also for those who are watching online. Got a good audience up there as well. And good to see so much energy for learning about disruptive innovation and building wealth Silicon Valley style. So that's really great to see and hear. I'm Sudesh Mujumdar. I'm the Dean of the Romain College of Business. I've got my notes here because David's a tough grader, so I said, oh, better bring my notes. What is a unicorn? Unicorn, it's a mythical being. It's a rarity, a rare sight. It's also a private company or a private startup that has over $1 billion in valuation. This moment today manifests both these representations. David Siminoff, our guest, has not only been courtside, not just had a courtside seat, but has run many of the plays in creating and building many unicorns. PayPal, he's an early investor in PayPal, Google, Amazon, 1,100 IPOs, so initial public offerings. Many of these companies have been disruptive innovators. They have created whole new markets and shaped a whole bunch of new markets. And for us here in the Romain College of Business, this is also a very historical moment. This is the first time, I believe, in our history where we are inviting and welcoming a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who's had this sort of transformational impact on many different industries. I mean, if you think Amazon, right? That's completely changed the way we shop. But if you think of how we shop now versus some of you may remember, like me, 20 years ago, has been completely transformed. David Siminoff is our inaugural speaker in our newly created Romain Market Maker Speaker Series, where we invite speakers who've helped create and shape whole new markets. Silicon Valley entrepreneurship also runs in the Siminoff family. His dad is a legendary entrepreneur and was a legendary entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. David's cousin, Jamie Siminoff, founded the famous Ring doorbell camera that some of you might have in your own homes. His daughter runs a GPU design company valued at over $5 billion. And so we were just sort of chatting about this, that Thanksgiving dinner at the Siminoff family, at least for someone like me, might be quite intimidating. But someone who would not be intimidated in striking up a conversation with David is our own Dr. Nicholas Rue. Some of you know him. He's chair of of the Department of Management and Information Sciences. If you've been in his classes, he's got this performative, engaging style. He also created the course on executive perspectives in management, where he's had plenty of experience and practice in engaging with CEOs from our region. So he's well prepared. And before I welcome David and Nick on stage, I just want to make sure I say all my thank yous. In case I don't get to say it later, I want to thank the whole marketing and communications team for putting this all together. It's the whole day, lots of different events. It's great work, really appreciate that. Appreciate our own staff at the Romain College, our faculty and staff, and the entire leadership of the Romain College of Business. And I'll be missing a few people, but thank you all and welcome. And let's give a USI welcome to David Siminoff and Dr. Nicholas Ray.
All right, good afternoon. Great to see so many students, especially turned out today. They, like me, are thrilled to hear your perspective on so many things that we don't necessarily always cover in the business curriculum. Certainly an unusual kind of background and history, and we're excited and thrilled to host and learn what we can from you. We're very grateful that you have shared your very valuable time. I think at one point earlier, we were discussing that for some venture capitalists and the like, they might value that time at $10,000 a minute. So it can be a very valuable time I can't afford, but we're extremely grateful that you're sharing it with us, sharing it with our students, sharing it with our faculty like you have. You know, in our promotions for today's event, we listed a few of your many accomplishments, right? Early tech investment success, 1,100 plus IPOs, you know, some of the other things. But before we get into those successes, I'd like to hear more about how you got your start, or maybe even before your start. Can you help us kind of set the stage? What led to David Siminoff, tech extraordinaire?
I think tech lucky lottery ticket winner is probably more the aphorism that works. But most of it really started from my being really close with my dad. He was in World War II. He was stationed at Pearl Harbor, and his job there was running the searchlights. Now, if you think about what the world looked like, security back then was literally a giant flashlight. It was like a garbage can size that shined up in the light, and when the bad guys' enemy airplanes came in, your job as a search person, my dad was physically a really big guy, was to like aim at the airplanes or whatever were coming in. So if they could, you know, the gunners on the US side could see them, then they could knock them out. So the first thing the airplanes wanted to do was knock out the lights. And one of my dad's really close friends was killed, and long story that was part of this. And after that, he kind of dedicated himself to fixing defense systems in one form or another. So my dad stayed on in the Army with this thing called the GI Bill, where they paid for advanced graduate studies and all kinds of engineering elements. Back then, the U.S. Army was the R&D center of the world for telecommunications. And my dad was part of the first group that pioneered radar, what's modern radar. And he then ended up working for Ford after he left the Army in the early 50s. And Ford back then was like Google today, like there were 28 divisions, and one of his divisions was the radar division of Ford, which was trying to build more or less a version of the modern cell phone. So radar doesn't really work for cell phone technology, and there wasn't the compute power and a whole bunch of other things. So they closed that, but in the process, my dad became a world's expert in microwave delay lines, which was the connecting conduit between phone towers. So back then, a big growth industry was putting copper phone wires on those giant, telephone poles across the country and across the world. It was a huge growth industry. So he built a product that made kind of the gray box talk to the copper wires, and yada yada, ended up building out a lot of the guts of fiber optics, and his area of specialty was shooting laser beams down little streams of glass fiber with incredible density. It was called wave division multiplexing that had digital waves. So one wave would go here, and another wave would start a millisecond behind it, and another a little behind it. So you could cram, 10,000 phone calls into a little tiny hair sized wire, and it kind of changed the way communications happen around the world. So his company had as a big customer Hewlett Packard, which is nothing like the Hewlett Packard you see today. Back then it was awesome and thriving and kind of the place that everyone wanted to go. So I say all that because I grew up at the dinner table with my dad hosting the great minds of Silicon Valley. They just didn't know they were going to end up being the great minds of Silicon Valley when they were in their 30s. So, my parents were kind of expected me to have some conversation at the dinner table. And so I was just simply expected to have good questions and all the other stuff as we sort of talked through what the cutting edge of the world was. And back then, the world was in a transition from transistors to semiconductors, and basically thinking about like a room this size would have 1,000th of processing power of what an iPhone does today and cost, a gajillion dollars. So I grew up largely learning about tech in the same way, like my big allegory is if you're raised in the middle of Beijing, you probably speak Chinese really well. Nobody had to really teach you how to speak Chinese. So I grew up speaking pretty fluent tech in most of the areas, but the tech itself kind of bored me, and I was very interested in what you could do with the tech, not so much making the guts of it. And it ended up kind of fomenting a very nice career, understanding tech, but then being on the investing side of it. And the normal thing we did after dinner is I would sit on my dad's lap. Back then, the Wall Street Journal was on paper, and it was this big, wide thing. And from the age 5 on, every night, we would pick one vocabulary word that he would explain to me, like what's a stock, what's a bond, and eventually what's a subtended non-fiduciary grid derivative, or what's whatever. So at a very young age, I was able to read the Wall Street Journal pretty fluently, and it changed the way I thought about investing, and kind of was my leak into the accidental career here.
So you grew up fairly modest home, I've heard you say.
Yeah.
Seemed all very normal.
Mm-hmm.
What happened from there in that childhood to get you, say, to your first investing job, your first professional job in investing?
It was shockingly modest. So Sudesh and I were driving around, and I was asking him, so what do homes sell for, whatever? The home I grew up in would have sold for about 200 grand here, maybe 250 grand. So very small, quarter acre, 3-bedroom house. My grandmother left me, a fair amount of money, a couple $100 grand, I think. And my dad signed me up to have my own Schwab One account. And for a pretty conservative guy, he was super liberal when it came to anything I did. So he said, I'm going to set you up an investing account. I think I was 10 years old, maybe 11. And we're going to put all the money in it, and you do with it what you want. It's yours. I got no say in it. You tell me what to do, I will do it, as long as it's legal. So I said, okay. Yeah, there was no crypto back then. So I said, okay, I want to buy this IPO, or I want to buy this stock. And he just entered the numbers. And I was kind of shocked at like how much, I guess, faith he had in me, or that he'd already known the stock or whatever was going on. Or he didn't care. He thought if I lost all the money, it'd be a good lesson. I don't know kind of what he was thinking. But it gave me total freedom to make my own mistakes. And that was the best parenting, because man, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. What wasn't a colossal failure was staying invested for a very, very, very long period of time. And if you think about it, like when I was 10 years old, that was the mid-'70s. There were very few IPOs, really, if any. The markets had absolutely cratered, but they had a huge dividend. So if all you did was stay long some oil stock, you got 7, 8, 9, 10% kind of dividend. And I don't know who paid the taxes in that account, because I don't remember ever doing so, but I think Dad gave me a little gift there. And things just kind of compounded away, and I was shocked when you invested money well. You didn't have to work. You could like make more money just sitting there watching your money go up like this than it did like having a real job. And all that was great until there was a big bear market, or you made a bad stock pick or something, and you lost more money in an afternoon than it would have taken you a month of mowing lawns, to go take care of. So really, that is kind of how the investing part existed on the public company side. Public stocks are crazy. Like you have to be certifiable to be doing that job, because the mood of a dictator in Latin America can change what a small tech stock does in Silicon Valley like this. And you have all kinds of exogenous factors that you have to be ultra paranoid about, because you can lose your shirt through no fault of the company doing poorly or anything else. There's all these exogenous factors that always play into it. So that kind of craziness drove me crazy. And I liked the venture capital or private investment business kind of better, because you weren't being assessed on a minute by minute basis for how smart you were or not that day or month or year. So the venture investment business is very different. Public markets, and a lot of you guys are accountants and business people, you actually have an income statement to read, you can look at the cash flow, you can look at, blah, 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 and we're gonna fund it with X dollars, and we'll burn this much over the next 18 months, and we need to raise another round, and so on. Pretty rational. But you can imagine what happens if every minute the attitude of 10,000 people assessing a new AI widget that, I don't know, does something interesting, then suddenly changes everything and the valuations go like this. So the venture business isn't like that. It's like 10 people who are all adults sitting around a table, looking at the numbers, making a rational decision that, hey, if things actually go well, here's what the company looks like in 3 or 4 or 5 years, and this is why I want to invest. So I kind of came into it orthogonally from the public and the private side, which maybe I'm different from most that way, in that most people have kind of one area or another that they are good at.
So you ended up in the VC space, but it was kind of a windy or a road with some distractions that took you there. At age 10, you didn't think, I think I want to be a venture capitalist.
At age 10, there was like 3 venture capital companies in all of Silicon Valley. The best one is Sequoia, founded by a guy named Don Valentine. Grew up with his kids. Don and my dad were friends. And Don got his original Sequoia One money from the company I eventually ended up working for, in Capital Group. Capital Group had its first foray as a venture, they're the American Funds Mutual Fund Group. So they're about a $2 trillion, I think, dollars under management today. Their original venture capital thing was to fund Disney. So the reason Capital Group's based in Los Angeles and has all that stuff in Anaheim is because the Disney family was their first kind of investment. And they did it, and they got lucky, and they were like, wow, man, this is great. And I think they did 2 or 3 other venture things that didn't go well, and they just stopped doing venture. And their public market stuff was doing so well, they just kind of let venture go away.
What did your educational path look like getting there?
Like a pachinko machine ball. I had wanted to do a whole bunch of things that I just wasn't talented enough. Like I would have loved to have been an engineer. Like my dad and my son just have the brains for it, and I simply didn't. So I ended up pouring coffee for engineers, which is really the second best thing there is in life. And it's lucrative, and you don't have to be that smart to do it. So it fit me perfectly. I went to Stanford as an undergrad. I was an English major in kind of math. In those days, computer science wasn't considered worthy of a major. It'd be like someone asking to major in like plumbing and carpentry here. You guys would all look down on them, despite like you needing plumbers and carpenters a lot more than you need your neo-modernist existential theorists. So I had wanted to do that. So I took all these math classes. I was pretty good at math and so on anyway. So I did that. I ended up going to Oxford for this special road system that ended up not working because the don I was going to study under died. Literally, I went to his flat one day and the secretary was crying, he's dead. So I went back to the US and was in law school for a semester, hated it. We bond on this issue, handed in my contracts exam and said, bye, I'm out of here, because I had, at the same time I had applied to law school, I had applied to film school. And I was a swimmer on the Stanford swim team. I swam through the '84 Olympic trials, had a good view of the bottom of the feed of all the guys who won. So very depressed. And my parents said, look, we'll pay for the last 2 years of your schooling. Just don't worry about the scholarship. Just go do your thing. And I got into writing and theater, and I'd had a couple plays I'd written that were produced in a place like this, and stuff like that. It was really fun. And then I wrote a screenplay and a couple other things. And so you send all that in as your audition material for USC Film School. My mother grabbed me one day. I was from law school. I was at home, and she said, "Hey, this guy named George is calling for you," and he said, "This is really important." So I pick up the phone, and "Hey, you're in. We really like your screenplay, and we want you to start." And blah blah blah. It was George freaking Lucas, like Star Wars George. So he literally was our professor, and he wasn't in film school all that much, because he had a day job, but like you got to learn from the best of the best in all their fields. And I learned more about engineering and sound waves and telecom, a lot of other things from film school, weirdly, than I did from actually my experiences at Stanford. So if you've heard of THX sound, so the TH in that is Tom Holman. Like that was the guy who taught us sound. So it's pretty awesome. So you learn all these fields and stuff that kind of played in a lot of my strong suits. So anyway, I did the whole Hollywood thing. I won a Student Academy Award. I got signed by Fox to write and direct a couple different things. This guy named Michael Lansbury, who was Angela Lansbury's nephew, who was doing a sitcom and a couple other shows. I wrote and directed a couple things. I had very long hair at the time, and my earring was in. Everyone thought I was cool, at least so they told me. And I completely washed out. I got assigned to a very bad series. We all knew it was bad. And I won't go into the details of just how bad it was. And basically, they fired everyone. And my agent said, "Hey, you know, you're really good at making coffee. If you'd like to be a secretary here, there's a job for you." So I had bigger aspirations than that. And I ended up applying to business school, got in at Stanford. I met my wife the first day. And I was building a syndicate barter company at the time in Eastern Europe and Russia. And the way that came about is I was a world-class swimmer, so I knew all the other world-class swimmers, and they were really easy to reach. And in those days, the Iron Bloc, the old big bad Soviet Union and all that, those people were all dying to come visit America, and so we're all pretty collegial. There wasn't email and all that, there was just mail, but their mail systems worked pretty good. So anyway, I got the swimmers in the Eastern Bloc to set me up with meetings with the head of the TV broadcast networks so that I could sell them TV programming that we had licensed from American TV libraries. So one was Group W, Westinghouse, which became CBS, and there were all these orphan libraries. So long story short, the deal worked. "Hi, CBS, Westinghouse, whoever, I'll pay you $1 today, and that gives me the right to license 1,000 hours of your TV programming, and if I do license it, I will pay you $100 an hour for a 4-year license," or something like that. And since there was a war going on in Bosnia and Moscow was closed to most normal Western business, the networks were like, "Hey, this is found money anyway. Let's just license it to them." And, you know, and a lot of the guys I knew from film school, and you know, we all kind of liked each other and stuff. So long story short, we aggregated a ton of advertising time in Russia and Eastern Europe at the time when the hard currency sale price of that was about $5 to reach millions and millions of people, somewhere between 30 and 100 million people. So you don't have to be a media guru to know that $5 to reach 100 million people is cheap. So we aggregated all this time, sold out to a big barter company, and kind of had enough dough to go do whatever our lives wanted. So it was a really lucky, nice run. But when we graduated Stanford Business School, we were in no danger of being valedictorian or anything like that. But we did graduate, not by much, because we were commuting during the war. That was a real hassle. But it was a great time.
I want to go back to something else for just a minute. You mentioned that at Stanford you studied math and English, and that's kind of atypical, right? We have students who kind of either go the verbal route or the math route. And I imagine that many of the business students in the room today don't love that they have to take English courses as part of their general education. What value did you find, or do you still find, in that combination?
It was something that sets you apart, because in those days, you're right, it was very bifurcated. You were either a nerdy math person who, you know, couldn't have a conversation and very socially awkward, whereas the English guys were all smooth, knew what kind of wine to pair with this kind of meat and all that, but like couldn't balance a checkbook. And so if you sat in between, you didn't have to be the best math guy and you didn't have to be the best English guy. You just had to talk to both of them, figure out who was, and pour coffee for them. So then you were on the team, and it worked out great. It was very, very easy because there were very few people who bridged, a range of disciplines. And being a varsity athlete at Stanford too was a very weird, surreal thing when, I was 17th in the world my senior year of high school in the 200 butterfly and into my freshman year. But I was the fourth best guy on the team in that event. Like the coach almost cut me. He just asked me to bring everyone Gatorade and towels and stuff. Like that was my big contribution. Any other campus, I would have been a big shot. But I was, basically like when I left the team after the Olympic trials, the coach was like, yeah, see ya, bye, have fun. It was no loss. So it was a great training thing and understanding, when you're really competing with the absolute best on the earth, and you think Olympic gold medalist in swimming, like whoever that is, like they are the best, certainly that year. You really have to know your audience. You have to know who your competition is, and kind of what makes for that kind of success. And it was a little bit Soliari-like from Amadeus. Like I knew how good Mozart was, despite my not being able to play at all as good as Mozart.
Yeah, but that's an important point though about kind of rounding out the education, whether through something where you're losing a lot to people who are really good. That losing can be really valuable in education.
I'm an expert at that. Yeah.
Or the English skills when you're kind of in a math-oriented field.
Yeah.
But going back to the career trajectory, you have this company, EastNet, you sell it, some delay, I understand, in getting the proceeds of that sale.
That's
and you've
right.
got to find a different job. And
That's
you
right.
land at Capital Group in the 90s for the
That's right.
dot-com boom.
I was there, I think it was 93, and my wife was one of the people running the LA Times website group. It was like in strategic planning and operations, all this other stuff. Basically, it was the website. And in 1993, like a website was like, wow, we've colonized Mars. I mean, like that was like an amazing technical achievement. So her job all day was talking to advertisers at Verizon and AT&T and MCI and Bank of America and all the various players who were early advertisers on the internet. So two of my friends were indexing the web in a crappy Army trailer in the parking lot at Stanford, and they were in the PhD program, and they were kind of flunking out, like they were really not doing well academically. And but they had built this website, and it was called Akibono at the time. It was named after a famous sumo wrestler. And their traffic was like this, and it kept growing so much. In those days, traffic didn't scale like AWS does today. You had to be AWS and add on a server each time, and it cost a fortune to handle all the requests for that traffic, particularly at 7:30 at night when there were 10,000 clicks a second coming for a given website. So they had to keep scaling up. It cost Stanford a lot more money to keep funding them for their PhD research and all the stuff that was about optimizing throughput pathways through complex ordinances. So long story short, the guys were like, hey, we've got Sequoia, wanting to put in money, and like, what do? We don't really understand what we have. And I'm like, guys, you have a magazine business. There's all the links to the website things. You just put an ad here, and you sell that ad. That's like, go look at Time Magazine or People Magazine or anything else. It's the same business, only it's electronic. Oh, we don't know, and Dave and Jerry were very good at coding, but had no idea how to like sell magazine ads or how businesses work or even how to like get a lease signed on a little office. So long story short, they hired my wife. The funding round happened. We invested in it and all that. And Elle kind of ran the train. She was like, ran biz dev, corp dev, was like an EVP COO kind of role with a lot of different product things that she did across there. And then they changed the company from Akibono to Yahoo. And the rest is kind of history. In the mid-90s, there were only 3 distribution entities. If you were a cooking website or a sports website or news, weather, whatever, you had to get a deal with either MSN, AOL, or Yahoo. And my wife was the gatekeeper at Yahoo. So we knew everybody who was doing things, and every now and then she'd say, hey, I think these people are pretty interesting. You should go meet with them, and blah, blah, blah. So it was very easy to understand who was doing well and who wasn't. And like she was the one who signed the actual Google deal, the original distribution deal for Google to become the default search engine for Yahoo with all the other trimmings then that went with all of that. So it's like kind of a luck and all the other things that went with it.
And so you end up at Capital Group, you're betting big on stocks. We're in the mid-90s, late 90s. And then all of a sudden, when things seem to be looking really nice, you decide to get out. What was it that led to that? Was it just sheer luck, or was something else happening?
It probably was just luck. But after a while, and I'd started actively investing. I was like maybe 11, something like that. So at this point, I'm 35 years old. So I've been doing this for 24 years. At 35 is a very young person, but 24 years of surviving in the public markets is like a really long time. So you just get a sense in your stomach for what's going on. And it wasn't perfect. Like I sold some things too early and some things too late, but the lion's share of the money we just blew out between Thanksgiving and maybe the end of January. Thanksgiving of '99 and the end of January 2000. Now, in hindsight, you'd look back and say, wow, that was awesome. You really nailed the timing right. But that's actually not the truth. What happened is, or the full truth, what actually happened is, you're looking in your history books, the market in February and March went up like this. It went up 22.5%. And we had sold kind of in here. So I'm like looking for a building to jump off because I'm holding all this cash and the market keeps grinding up and up and up. And there was this thing called Y2K. It was this snake oil that Deloitte Touche and Arthur Andersen, all the other firms that implement this stuff wanted to make everyone nervous about, that the numbers would be divided by the 00 in 2000 because lazy coders hadn't done it right and all that. And like nothing happened. But there was this whole flurry about it. So you were making a bet that the world wouldn't end with, 2000, the year 2000, and the market would rally a bit. And I had it rallying here, and it actually rallied here. Now, in reality, after that, it did this. So it looked great. But like we talk about mistakes and timing and how things are so tight, for a couple of months there, I was feeling like a complete idiot. And it took another couple months to catch up. And then I felt pretty smart. But it was the whole thing was just a very different thing. And it kind of goes to the difference between genius and mediocrity in Silicon Valley is such a narrow line, you almost can't see it. And it's the tip, the whisper of a wind that blows a leaf this way or that way, and the butterfly effect hits you. And you ended up with the right group of people at the right group of time in the right country and the right whatever. And things work. And I'd complain to my dad about like being upset about things, and the market wasn't going my way. He's like, okay, talk to your great-grandparents who were in the middle of Ukraine as farmers. And a good day was the day the cows didn't die, or they didn't get shot by the Cossacks, or they didn't have like some other tragedy befall them. Like, talk about a good day and a bad day now. How are you thinking? And I'm like, okay, I'll go back to work.
Until you don't. Until you decide to retire. You sell off Capital Group and you quote unquote retire, but you stayed pretty busy. What have you been doing in the intervening 25 years?
Well, after a while, your money owns you more than you own it, and you've got to babysit it and all that. So I run our family office. I do all of our personal investing. We don't outsource to Goldman or Morgan or any of that stuff. We use their services, but it's kind of on our own. And I've loved mentoring young people. I've gotten a lot of my ideas for investing by doing that, and I've invested in a number of them, and that has worked out really, really well. At the same time, I've kind of run a couple of companies as an operating guy, and been involved in a lot of boards. I was on the athletic board at Stanford for years and years. And then my wife's had a better career probably than I have. And she's on the board. She was on the board of Discovery Ed and Verifone and TakeTwo and a whole bunch of other public companies. A number of them have gotten bought. And then she is on the board of Hoover. She and Condi are actually really close friends. So it's been kind of a wild run that way between the two of us, just having front row seats of this whole revolution.
So you retired from Capital Group. You haven't retired from investing. Still doing quite a bit of work there. What would you say? What are a couple of key successes on that investing front you can point to? What are some of the names of those successes?
Gosh, here's a little bit of a weird answer to that. The best thing I think that I did was to stay long, to stay invested. So it would be very easy after the mortgage crisis in 08, 09, 10 to have just quit on the equity markets and said, you know, it's too volatile for me, I'm just going to own a bunch of muni bonds. But if you had done that, you'd have compounded like this, and if you stayed long the equity markets, you compounded like this. And if you were good in the equity markets, you compounded like this. Like we've had this astonishing bull market run. And we own almost, I think, no bonds. We've been probably 99% equities. So it's like taking a lot of risk. Like most people don't, they own a third of their portfolio's bonds and 10%'s gold or whatever. But we've been almost all tech stocks and everything else. We've kind of ridden this bull market in a nice way. So there isn't a particular stock that does that, but staying along all of them has been a good bet.
So on the IPO side, we mentioned that you've been involved with something like 1,100 plus IPOs. When you're choosing, okay, where to go, or when you look back and you see the ones that have been successful, what informs that success? What is it? Why are those successful and so many others are into bankruptcy?
Sure. So just to clarify, by the time a company gets to an IPO, it's already demonstrated efficacy in one form or another in a normal market. Now, in late '99, it was different, but so there's that. And then on the 1,100 number, I don't know how that number came up, but I'll just kind of, someone from the press had calculated, who had done the most in Silicon Valley. About 600 of those came while I was at Capital Group, and another 250, maybe 300 came as a limited partner investor partnering with venture capital companies in Silicon Valley. And then there was another 50 or 80 that were done as kind of primary, secondary, sort of other, kind of one-off investments. And then about 60 of those were my own investment in one form or another, either board comp where you get options and all that and you buy them out. And that's my wife and me. So it's a big number, but it's a little bit misleading because these weren't all personal investments. But on that number, the weird thing that works is alignment. And we talk about this all the time. Nobody gets venture funding today if they're trying to do the best surfboard shop in Malibu. And that surfboard shop might be great. You could sell 1,000 surfboards a year or a quarter or a month. No one's ever going to care. It's never going to go public. It's never going to make huge wealth. It's never going to disrupt an industry. It's fine. It's surfboards. It's this big. But Google wanted to say, hey, we know how to organize the internet. We know how to take on an operating system and make the network the operating system, basically, which is what they did. Other people have pitched ideas like Joby, which did this, is a flying car. Because you're sitting in traffic in LA or New York or somewhere just getting more and more angry, wishing you were in Evansville on the Lloyd and thinking, God, shoot me. So a flying car would get me out of this. So they're all big ideas with founders who align in personality and everything else with that industry and can talk the tech. So the Joby founders, like you go very deep with them on the engineering, and here's the battery problem, and here's the flight problem, and here's how we've solved this, and we've solved that. And all of them have to have solved a really difficult problem. Like pouring coffee, or like setting up a coffee shop, or a restaurant, or a bar, or a surfboard shop. Not hard. Anyone could copy it. They're all about the same. And it's fine. Starbucks kind of pioneered it, and they kind of own it. Dutch Brothers maybe is coming up behind. But those are not really venture capital kinds of things that aren't solving an incredibly hard problem. A really hard problem is when someone comes to you and says, the way we etch semiconductors today is all wrong. We use gallium arsenide, and we use a combination of this and this. It's very pollutive. It's blah, 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 blah. But I have an idea to run a very tight laser beam through a series of pyramids that are both glass, they're both atoms, and they're also digitally rendered with bits. And I'm going to striate the laser beams into 10,000 little nuggets that are less than a nanometer. They're like an angstrom wide, or that level width. And in doing so, I can put a terabyte of information on something the size of your fingernail, and you no longer have to surf the internet, because you'll just copy the whole internet onto your fingernail-sized chip, And then you'll bring in new stuff from the web, but you no longer need big bandwidth. You no longer need fiber. You no longer need anything other than like an AOL dial-up would be just fine for what your uses are. And it completely blows up the existing telecommunications network. That's cool. That's a $2-3 trillion industry today with a lot of very nervous people that you would blow out of the water. There's two 23-year-olds from Stanford who they're dropping out of their PhD program to do that. So when you hear something like that, man, you pay attention. And they're erudite, they're clear, they know exactly, they'd done all their homework, they'd Googled the crap out of me, they knew about bad golf games I'd had and like all this other stuff. So, so you just get a sense for it. And the rounds are you take 300-400 meetings, you do maybe 10 or 12 that are return meetings to fund one company. So a lot of people, just because they get a meeting, it doesn't mean anything.
Let's talk about the profile of some of those founders for a minute. This is kind of interesting to hear your perspective, having heard it in a few other settings. What's that ideal founder look like for you if you're planning to bet on this company or idea?
The founders who work generally, not 100% of them, but generally, you look for people who have had bad childhoods. They hopefully had really angry situations with their parents. They wish they were 5'8", they're only 5'5". They are just angry about everything. There's a chip on their shoulder about every issue. Someone says, I like meat. They say, well, what's wrong with chicken? And, and so on. They have to be used to being alone and right, but only proven right way later. There has to be a lot of insecurity. If I don't make this company work, I'm dead. So either this company's going to work or I'm finding a big tall building to jump off of or whatever. So there's all this stuff that is about deep urgency where there's extreme commitment to making this thing work or they like die trying. And it's typically that profile that generates the great founders of the earth. And you can look at Larry and Sergey and Jeff Bezos and Elon and I don't know, Zuck. You can look at all the oligarchs, whatever you want to call them today. They all kind of have that same vibe.
Doesn't sound like a great life. Like
it's not. It's not. And like a lot of people want to be these people, and I know them, and like you don't. You don't want to be them. They're richer, but they're not happier. I almost guarantee you, all of you are happier than all those people. And by the way, you also have to think about, let's pick Elon, just because he's like famous today. Do you have any idea how much security he has to have? How would you feel if 1 billion people wanted you dead? What would you do if, they wanted your children dead ahead of you? And all the other things that go with it. And you ask yourself, okay, what's important in life? Like when I'm at my deathbed, nobody I've ever met has said, oh, I spent too much time with my children and family. Nobody's ever said, man, I shouldn't have had so many Thanksgivings hosted at my house, so I have to house all these, family members that come in. Nobody's ever said, I don't have enough money. So you think about all that stuff. It's very different. Silicon Valley ethos here that we're talking about, they're richer, but they're not happier. They're just richer. So you got to kind of think about what it is. And a lot of people ask me, okay, well, what is wealth? Or like, how do you think about it? How do I get there? Like, it's all relative, right? And my ancestors in Ukraine, wealth was the day they weren't like killed or raped or maimed or abused or burned out of their house. Like that was wealth. And so a little better. Like here, you guys can all go be accountants or consultants or bankers or like whatever it is. If you want to live in Evansville, you get a beautiful house here for $500,000. Like beautiful. So like, why would you ever leave? Like there's the part of me that's like, God, wealth here, you make $1 million. You could buy your house, have a nice dividend income stream, go play golf at the local course or whatever. It's a great frickin' life. Like this is wealth. And it's like almost like a lot of people don't even realize it.
Let's talk about a couple of the different paths to get to that point. Wealth creation, either for a founder, for kind of early employees, later employees. What are some of the different paths toward wealth creation? What does a win look like?
So let's start with Bezos, because I was directly involved with a lot of transactions. So he started out with 100% of Amazon. Then he got $312,000 from his mom and 100 grand from this guy and 100 grand from that guy. And then he owned 86%. Then he got an A round of funding from Kleiner Perkins, and he owned 72%. And then he got a B round from someone else, and he owned, 42%. And then he owned blah, blah, blah. So it ended up that he owned, I think today, 14% of Amazon. But Amazon's worth like $2 trillion or something like that. So like 14% of $2 trillion, or I don't think it's 40, it must be 7 because he's about 130 billion. It's like a crazy number, right? It's enormous wealth in the scheme of things. So that's founder economics. When you're the guy and it's like your whole life is there and you're going to make it or break it or not, and Jeff made it in a very big way. So now let me go to kind of the other end. You don't have the mercurial personality. You actually loved your parents and they treated you well. And you're 5'10", and you don't worry about the thing. And you don't have a chip on your shoulder. You're just really smart and dedicated and really good at engineering or math or marketing or I don't know, whatever it is you're good at. And you become employee number 27. Well, employee number 27 at Amazon got an initial package of 1.2% of the company in options. They bought a little bit more, so they got to be 1.5%. And then over time, they got diluted down, so today they own about 0.7% of the company. Well, 1% of $2 trillion is 20 billion, so they have about $14 billion in Amazon stock. Nice life, right? You don't have to shop at Walmart. You can get rid of that 9-year-old Honda Accord, a car that actually starts in the winter, and so on. So you don't have to be a founder to be wealthy and successful and happy. And that employee 27, if Amazon went bankrupt and they did something really bad or God knows what, that person would work again. They can go on LinkedIn and get another job in 5 minutes. So there's great value add to not being the person that the maddening crowds carry out on their shoulders chanting your name. There's great value in the privacy and anonymity of being quietly successful and just not worrying about being an oligarch. And all the oligarchs did not start out wanting to be oligarchs. They just wanted a company they could run that would do reasonably well. And because all their competitors were half asleep and the market changed and a lot of other good things happened, they made it huge. But it's a very different profile. And so being an early stage employee at a startup, really good gig. Risk adjusted, the best gig.
So it's different though than the path most of our students take, right? Where we come through and we prepare them for jobs at sizable organizations, but well established, and they get a nice salary to start and some good benefits, and have a nice career, which is wonderful. But that's a very different life than maybe being employee 27.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those two differences?
You bet. So the ultimate, in my mind, would be, let's just pick, because it's a tangible career, someone being a lawyer, okay? So let me pick a Silicon Valley lawyer, who's high priced, so on. Typical Silicon Valley lawyer will make 230, 240 grand out of law school, and by the time they're 50 years old and they have tons of clients and all that, they're making, let's say, $2 million a year. A 50-year-old making $2 million a year. After tax in California, that $2 million is about $920,000. By that time, they've had no great living situation because homes in Silicon Valley are $2,800 a foot. So like the $300,000 homes here are about $6 million in Silicon Valley. So for a lawyer who has no IPO stock, law firms don't go public, there's no stock options, no one's going to pay some big price, particularly now in the era of Harvey and AI and the destruction of legal services, it's a completely different animal. So even if you were the valedictorian at Harvard Law School and you went to Wilson Sonsini, which is the biggest law firm in Silicon Valley, and you did really well there, and you did this and that and the other thing, you're still not anything remotely close to as wealthy as the guy who has a chain of 10 surfboard shops all around LA that's like surfboards with Bluetooth or whatever. And like that surfboard guy will probably keep way more money than that senior prestige lawyer at Wilson Sonsini. And that lawyer's got to work for every hour they get paid. So this whole notion of the problem with consulting and all that as a career, you know, you got to work for every hour. Your money doesn't really work for you. You don't have leverage in making a living.
It actually, mentioning Harvey, the AI and what it could do to the legal profession is a nice segue to talk about AI. It's a hot topic. We haven't talked about it much. I imagine it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. What are your kind of general thoughts on where we stand with AI?
So there's a disconnect here in a lot of the conversations I've had. So one is the valuations placed on AI companies, which are insane. So you have companies with almost no revenue who get unicorn status billing, $1 billion valuation as a startup with no revenues, barely even a product, but just a bunch of PhDs from MIT and Stanford working there. So there's a valuation disconnect that will end very badly at some point, just like the dot-com bubble and all the other bubbles that existed, and all that's fine. But then there's AI as an ideology and a set of products and services. It'll be cool. It'll be around. People will use it. But it will be nothing like, I think, what the hype is like today. But it will, meaning it's a virus on your careers, not a bear attack. A virus attack is where the legal profession, which has 1.2 million employees this now, will lose 25, 30,000 a year each year until it diets down 20 years from now to half the number today. Why? Because AI, through various products, LegalZoom, Harvey, and all that, you'll be able to type in, you know, give me props for a bot to do my will and testament or whatever for my estate. And it'll say, great, we think you want to fill out an estate form. Let us talk to you for a little while and get to know you and what you'd like to do and blah, blah, blah. How many children do you have? Do you want to, what percentage of your money do you want to leave to the first one? What percent, blah, blah, blah. It'll go through, and by the time you're done, it's basically like talking to a human being across a desk. They fill it out. It's 98% done. A paralegal then proofreads it to the end to be sure ChatGPT didn't burp or something in the middle of it. And then you're done, and all of a sudden, what used to be a $16,000 bill is a $300 bill. And so all of a sudden, the industry just shrinks. So that's AI on the human suck of reducing things. And on the other side of it, there's AI empowering a lot of interesting things and making them work better. And a lot of people are doom and gloom worried about it's going to take over our missile silos. And go watch the movie 2001 a couple times. You get worried about HAL and all the other things that are evil that could happen. I'm not so worried about that, at least now.
Do you see many parallels with where we stand in AI to your work in the 90s with the dot-coms?
The valuation insanity is there because you have a lot of retail investors who don't know what they're doing. And they don't know what they're buying when they buy stocks on the way up. And they won't know what they're doing when they sell stocks on the way down. So you have these extremists where you have these things that pop up to crazy levels and then die down to crazy levels. So you got to be kind of smart to sell here, wait, and then ideally buy here for the companies that are still worth, kind of sticking around. So.
All right, so changing gears a little bit, although certainly related to AI because AI skills are going to be pretty important, I think, in the future. We've got loads of students in the room, and I imagine that many of them are here to hear your thoughts on how they can be successful.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on how they, as college freshmen through seniors, what can they do to set them up for success?
So there's a couple of weird elements that go through that for you guys. When I was a kid, we used to have to memorize multiplication tables. 7 times 13, 8 times 12, and there was like a contest, and you write them out in the morning. Then along came cheap calculators, and they stopped making kids memorize things. It was just a dumb thing, like why would you bother memorizing, like things like that. I wonder aloud if ChatGPT has made writing obsolete. So if you want to write an essay on something, try it out on ChatGPT. It's like you put in a half a dozen prompts and eventually titrate the essay, then you copy it, paste it back in, and do it again 3 or 4 times. You get an amazing quality essay now, way better than 99% of people could write, and it takes 5 minutes. So the whole notion of whether we want to write to help people to organize their thoughts in a cogent argument, maybe, There's lots of ways to teach that, though, rather than master pros that you really don't need to do anymore. So that's something I think the jury's out. My guess is the writing will be obviated in one form or another. The second part of all this is the way that AI sort of super serves a lot of the industries in making the number of jobs smaller, but the people who run the jobs more important. So the haves will have more, the have-nots will evaporate. So go back to the lawyer paradigm. If you're a lawyer and you're kind of a normal lawyer, you can take on this much client work and you don't need much assistance doing it, whereas you used to be able to take this if you're good at the queries on AI. And so a big thing of our luncheon discussion, we were talking about, I think about AI as a little bit, learning how to code and be an AI coder and all that and get a PhD in math and then comp sci and all that. Good luck. It's this many people who can actually do that of value. But that's like learning how to make a car. Why would anyone care to make a car, right? Unless you're an early founder at Tesla. Like, there's no reason for you to learn how to make a car. But there's every reason for you to learn how to drive a car. So, learning AI queries and each flavor of them that's different in ChatGPT versus any of the other flavors of these AI grid systems, you have to know that, and you have to know it really well. And a big part of the banking and consulting and the other big interviews is they'll say, hey, what's a topic you follow? And you might say, the Jurassic period, a dinosaur, like that's one of my ears. So, and they'll say, great, well, so if you're looking for research for a T-Rex, and you're trying to find information on the very round skull type they had, what would your queries be? And you better know, because they'll be like, well, wait a sec, you don't know how to use AI, you don't know how to drive a car, thank you, goodbye. So like understanding that and spending a lot of time with ChatGPT, like you spend all this money going to college, why not spend the $30 a month to buy the premium AI account on wherever, and just use it and abuse it. Like try lots of things, try to build video, try to do like all the other really hard things with it, because you will get asked that stuff in an interview. That stuff's way more important than whatever your GPA was or whatever grid courses you took.
So what down a similar road with the next question. We talk about some of the skills that our students need. What are they up against? What are they competing against?
So in AI broadly, you're competing against a semiconductor. So at some point it will win. So you've got to figure out how you win going around it in some way and adding more value than it does, the computer processing and all the software behind it. Because at the very high level, where you're spending $500 million building a computer brain, they're really impressive. It's shocking how good they can do almost all the normal middle management jobs. So that's one element. If you want to be a hedge fund manager, if you want to come work for me or something, and you want to do all that, it's a different field. I've had a bunch of questions about, hey, I'm thinking of going and being a hedge fund manager. And I'm like, well, that's great. Like, are you 5? Like, if you didn't start when you were very, very young and you can answer questions at a very sophisticated level, like, there's no book called Neurosurgery for Dummies, right? There's no hedge fund book, Hedge Funds for Dummies. You either do it and you really know what you're doing, because if you don't, you can kill people in neurosurgery, or you can bankrupt people if you don't know what you're doing in a hedge fund. And young people tend to take a lot of risk. They do really well for 2 or 3 years. Then the market goes the other way and they lose everything and bankrupt the fund, and the founders are fired and they're like bank teller 3 at German American Bank here down the road. So really, really bad if you don't know what you're doing, and almost everyone young in it takes too much risk. So the high-end competition, the easy watchword is, you start at what you're good at naturally. So what did you care about when you were 5, right? Like if you're good with people, if you're good with, numbers, and you like doing things and all that, and you're just kind of good at operations, all that, go into private equity. Go buy companies, learn how to fire lots of people gently so they still like you. learn how to read union contracts, learn how to understand 401k, tax attributions, all the other stuff, and go do private equity. Like, that's a great job. A lot of the people here, they've asked me what I thought they should do, knowing this much about them, and many of them are perfect, like personality and talent and all that, to go into that domain.
What do you see as the strengths of kind of the USI students you've met versus maybe some of the students you're more familiar seeing kind of in Silicon Valley?
Well, yeah, so I spent a lot of time at Stanford, talking with young people there. The top quartile here is as smart as the top whatever at Stanford. There's very little difference in intellectual horsepower and curiosity and, all that kind of stuff, and the discipline and studying and getting decent grades and all that. There's also wonderful integrity here. There's very few people here who, like, I wouldn't trust with my wallet and all that, whereas in the Valley, like, I wouldn't trust most of the people there with my wallet to, like, go pick up my laundry. So it's a very different kind of mindset for how urgent you're trying to make that next buck. So that's one part. So the talent isn't the issue. All the hard stuff you guys have done, you've missed one thing. And the one thing that is so different with the Silicon Valley kids is they understand the difference between working hard and getting a job and being that Wilson Sonsini lawyer who can finally afford a crappy home and a quarter acre when he's 43 and is never going to live in the nice part of town and eventually retires angry, bitter, and not very wealthy. That's working hard for a living and trying to live in Silicon Valley. What USI students don't understand is wealth. The idea of generating lots of wealth for whoever your investors are, and you keeping 5, 10, 20% of it. So then you have leverage. And just to take a minute on how venture capital works, because a lot of people have asked me about it. A normal venture fund that's a tier 1 or 2 fund, meaning pretty high-end fund, has a pretty good track record, and there's only maybe 100 of them in total in all of Silicon Valley, of tier 1 and 2. Tier 1, there's maybe 15 firms. They raise $500 million. And they get 2% fee and they get 25% of profits. So they run that fund, they invest it for a couple of years, and then they raise another fund, another $500 million. They run that for a few years and invest it, and another fund. So about every 2 years, 3 years, they raise another fund. And that first fund, after 5, 8, 10 years, if they did well, tripled. So they send back $1 billion of profits to investors, and they keep $200 million, because 20 or $250 million, 25%. Then that next fund's doing the same thing 2 years later, and they keep $250 million. And the next thing, $250 million. So you have 4, 5, 6, 8 guys, they're people, like splitting that $250 million plus about $1 million a year salary. Now, that's misleading, because on the $1 million, you're going to keep about $570 after tax, and you have to buy into all the funds. So of the $570 that you'd keep, you have to spend about $300,000 buying in the funds. So you only have $270,000 to live in. And remember, a dump of a home is $5 million. So you are the poorest person on the block as a young VC, because you're kind of buying in your partner shares. But then if things go well and the IPO happens and you get your 6% of that $250 million, boom, $15 million in Google stock. And it gives you, boom, $15 million in this stock, and that stock, and that stock. So you wake up 5 years later and you have $50 million. But holy crap, you're used to living in a little tiny home with, a 9-year-old Honda Accord, and, your kids go to public school. And you kind of wake up one day, and for most people, or at least a lot of people, they really like that life. They don't change. They have $50, $100, $200 million in the bank, and they just leave it there, and they keep their mouth shut. The neighbors, my wife and I, most people thought I was an orthodontist, and she was like a school teacher or something. And you lead a really simple, normal life, and it's great for your kids, because they then don't get all messed up by, look at the children of all the oligarchs and all that stuff. It's a mess. So it's a nice way to live, and you don't have to work then, right? Like, you can leave, if your total spend is $100,000 a year for everything, there's a lot would have to go wrong with your investments for you to not be able to lead that life. So it's this whole notion of what is wealth and what does all that mean. It kind of comes back to that centrality.
And that's a big difference between, again, the Southern Indiana student and the Silicon Valley students you're used to dealing with. One other question before we move to some questions from the audience, which thankfully I have right here.
Excellent.
Andy, thanks to
Cold
Darla
calling.
in the
Yes.
back, pulling the questions. Technology is wonderful when it works. So, but one other question, we're here at the University of Southern Indiana, and you've mentioned Stanford several times. Obviously, it's played a huge role in your life, and you've played a significant role in Stanford. What lessons can we learn at USI as faculty, administrators? What do we need to be doing to do what we can to emulate Stanford's success?
So Stanford's success, I would define, is largely a financial one that was driven by amazing engineering and a culture that prizes the best engineering. So, and we were kind of talking about in Silicon Valley, the prestige of what exists in junior high school and high school is kind of the opposite of what you find in most of the country. In most of the country, the highest on the social ring is like the quarterback and the cheerleader. In the Valley, it's the opposite. They're the lowest on the rung, and for the 8 people who ever go to their football games, they hold up signs saying, "Someday you'll be selling life insurance to me." And so they're not treated well. The high is the math contest winner, the robot championship winner, or the various STEM competitions winners. That culture is very much Stanford, except when it comes to Olympic gold medalists who are on the varsity teams, where it's a little bit of a different conversation because they're icons, Tiger, Katie Ledecky, like I go through a whole long list, and like Stanford's a crazy place that way. Like in the admissions thing with the athletic board, you're literally debating over someone who won only a bronze medal in the Olympics, and should we give her the scholarship, or we have the gold medalist who wants to come here too? So imagine turning away, like, you have any idea how good of an athlete a bronze medalist is from the Olympics swimming? But Stanford's a crazy place. So first of all, there's that cultural thing that is very different, and it's turned upside down, and all the resources and energy and whatever from the faculty go from the best students, and they get championed, they get loved the way you would think a quarterback would have in a different era. So that's a big part of it. Then there's this ecosystem of the dorms. And a lot of people who were the early employees at Google knew Larry and Sergey from their PhD program. And they all got offered like 1% of the company. So imagine, like you own 1% of Google today, is probably diluted down now to 0.7%, $3 trillion, you have $21 billion. And that's for just being, best dorm mate ever. So there's all of this that came about with the great wealth that happened to be at Stanford with the whole dot-com bubble. And since we're close to it, maybe this is worth telling my Netscape Yahoo story real quick. So you guys know University of Illinois here is where Marc Andreessen went. Now Marc's the founder of Netscape. So Netscape was founded about 6 months ahead of Yahoo, or maybe contiguous, and Netscape was a browser that you downloaded, and a famous war with Microsoft and the Explorer, they kind of lost. And Yahoo was in the trailers, I've already told you about that. So long story short, Marc created this beautiful browser that parsed data in this really elegant way with very, very light coding. Like if you look at the artistry, like Marc and I have stayed friends all these years, and like the elegance of him at 19 was just like really amazing as an engineer. And he did it at University of Illinois. So he wanted to take venture capital funding from Kleiner Perkins, one of the legendary tier 1 venture firms in Silicon Valley, just amazing, all set, got the money ready to go. And some professor there said, well, wait, we own the IP of that, and we get a royalty, and we're owning this and that and the other thing. So long story short, some professor there who I think was a Marxist sued Netscape and sued Kleiner Perkins and sued Marc and sued whatever, and I think he won a $500,000 settlement that Kleiner Perkins paid to University of Illinois. And that got Netscape free of U of Illinois anything, and then they owned all the IP and they did their thing. Now go to Stanford. So when Dave and Jerry started Yahoo, Stanford did the opposite. They said, because they were very nervous about the IP, and I knew the guy, Howie Pearson, who was like running all this stuff inside the university, and I went up to him and I said, look, can we get a waiver? We don't want to have a Netscape situation with you. And he said, no problem. This is great. One favor. You're going to invest in Yahoo. Do you think we could invest alongside you? And I'm like, oh my God, really? We could have Stanford investing with us? That'd be amazing. So he said, yeah, not only that, but Dave and Jerry can keep the crappy leaking trailer that they live in, and we'll give them the computers, and we'll give them the network and whatever. And I'm like, is there any catch? Like, what am I missing here? He said, there's one catch. At Stanford, when you're successful, we don't shake hands like this. We shake hands like this. So Mark went on to Netscape, and most of the Netscape people went to Google and became personal net worth of, I think, about $1.5 trillion from that whole network of people. You know how much University of Illinois got in donations from that group? It would buy like a free latte. You know how much and Yahoo was about the same magnitude, because those people, a lot of them went to NVIDIA, and a lot of them went to like other places in the media business and stuff around it. Stanford got, I think, $14.7 billion just from that Yahoo place in donations into their endowment. So that professor at U of Illinois was chortling for a while about that he got a $500,000 settlement. And then N years later, somebody from Netscape, it might have been Mark, put up a tracker for how much U of Illinois lost in endowment money because of the alum who Mark, like, you'd be blackballed if you donated anything to that school. So you think about what that says about trust and the nature of the way the ecosystem of Silicon Valley works. It's just kind of about a different level of fairness that way. And the money keeps coming. I mean, Stanford's a money machine. There's vast sums that are owed there. And the way you donate is you don't really donate like cash. You donate shares of stock in an IPO, because like in a typical IPO, your cost basis is $1 and the IPO is trading at 30 or 40 or 50, and then it gets to 100. And you're like, okay, if I sell this, I'm going to pay tax on $99 of gain. In Silicon Valley, that tax is 42%. So you're only going to keep a much smaller number. So people just donate the shares to Stanford. Stanford then sells them, and they don't pay tax because they're or at least until last year, this year, they didn't pay tax, and because they're a nonprofit, so they don't bother.
Interesting lessons there, and how to invest and support ideas rather than taking the more combative approach. Certainly some lessons we can learn. So I want to switch gears to some questions from the audience. The first one was from a student you met this morning, actually, Jack Reitman, who asks, of all the books you have read, which one has impacted you the most in your career?
Wow, that is a good one. It's hard to have a most, so I'll do like a kind of relevant one here. There's a book called The Goal that's just awesome, and it's about how fragile ecosystems are when you're building something, and that's of people, of product, of systems, and it kind of chronicles this guy who had a plastics extrusion company, and they were lazy about checking inventory and about ordering in advance and all that, and one little thing went wrong, and it was like chaos within the company, and they almost went bankrupt. So that's the first goal, the first book they have you read at Stanford Biz School when you get there. If you haven't read it, you should. It's like 200 pages, easy read, great reading.
How much do you read? Do you read much?
A lot.
Yeah, that's one thing I routinely tell students, and I think even this week in class, that leaders are readers almost universally. I know very few who aren't heavy readers.
Yeah. No, I read. My parents had me go, when I was little, a bunch of us went to this thing called the Evelyn Wood reading course. So it was like a speed reading thing. And so you learn how to read really, really fast at a very young age, so you can process like a book a day without having a whole lot of stress on you. So it lets you digest a lot more info.
All right, so a little bit of a different question. What is your favorite thing about what you do now? What brings you joy in your work?
Wow, these are good questions. I think it's like getting other people to hit their sartori or their done, the vision that kind of clicks with them in life. And you have a lot of people who have an ambiguous outlook on things, or are frightened to try things, or nervous about this and that. And a lot of times there's then adult supervision like, hey, you're thinking about it all in this way, but you really should be looking over here. And if you did, you have all these benefits that no one else does. And if you run fast, your company could do this, and then we're off to the races and all that. So there's kind of a look people get that is, I'd say that's the best non-family thing in my life.
Well, let's talk about the family thing a bit too, because while mostly students here, I know there are some other folks who may be parents or even grandparents. What on the family side, if you have a couple of kids who are seeing some great success, what advice do you have for parents to try to maximize their children's or grandchildren's likelihood of success?
Well, so success is not a financial thing. It's a amalgam of a bunch of things. But I think for me, a lot of it was knowing my kids and knowing what they were terrible at. And they'll be the first to tell you all the things they were terrible at. And we were ruthlessly honest with them, or the coach was ruthlessly honest. My daughter, who's like a world-class golfer and could have probably been a tour pro if she'd wanted to, was terrible at everything. We tried her with soccer and swimming and volleyball and softball and all this other stuff and just failed. If we were different kind of parents, we would have tried to push her in certain ways to be really good at that, but we just kept trying other sports as long as she was willing to try them. And then for whatever reason, golf just clicked with her, and she ended up being awesome. She was captain of her D1 team and won a whole bunch of things and stuff. So I think a lot of it is just knowing your kids, and that's another Silicon Valley thing. You have a lot of really smart, successful, very wealthy people who are great at coding in Java or whatever, but terrible parents. And they just kind of ignore the kids and just probably didn't want to have them, but kind of it was like they were supposed to, and so they did. And so then the kids kind of sense that, because kids are way smarter than you give them credit for. And so it just ends up being this very depressing thing. And a lot of them, many, many billions of dollar whatever parents, and they kind of try to buy their kids' self-esteem because they didn't let them fail when they were little. They weren't tough on them when they should have been, because they were worried they were going to be sad for a day or something, and didn't understand the long-term goal.
The failure bit is a theme that's come up in many discussions.
Failure is
today.
good.
Another question that came in, what do you kind of wish you would have known starting out that would have made your career easier? Or is easier even a better thing?
Yeah, I don't know if easier is better. I think that's my thing. I like the grind. The grind makes me feel alive. So, pick swimming or any sport or whatever. You got to be kind of a masochist to go do a sport and try to compete at any level. And I like the fight itself. The fight is an end in itself and a reward. I don't necessarily worry so much about the outcome, at least not the short-term outcome, as long as there's progress being made. And so it's just a mindset that's just different. You fight because you're there to fight. Life is short, play hard. It's the Nike thing. I love that vibe.
It's related to the discussion we had earlier about stress.
Yeah.
And stress, frequently being kind of referred to as a negative thing. But if you change your perspective on stress, it can be very productive. And you enjoy the stress.
I enjoy the stress, and our family enjoys the stress. And if there's no pressure, there's no diamond, right? You've heard that. But it's also, pressure is a privilege. I'm not sure which college football coach just said that, but that got quoted a bunch. If nobody cares if you're good or not, and you're just driving a bus for a living or something like that, who cares? Then there's no pressure. There's light pressure to get the kids home without getting killed. Other than that, who cares? And that's fine. You want that kind of life? No problem. But for me, where life comes alive is where there's a lot of pressure, and you got to perform, and everyone else is afraid to do it, and they can't, whatever. My dad was the kind of guy who was not the most fun when times were great, because he just didn't celebrate in a relaxed way. I think because living through World War II and a lot of other things, he just wasn't that kind of way. But man, when times were bad, he was awesome. So I always wanted to be that kind of guy. When times were tough, that I was the rock, and that people gravitate, not when times are great, but when times are miserable. and to kind of be there. And so that for me was always the vibe that I wanted to have, and that the grind of that, of having to be strong when everyone's terrified, and you're probably terrified inside, but you kind of keep perspective on where you're heading, and eventually things will be just fine.
It's easy to be great when everything's going well.
Yeah, exactly. Bull markets.
Yeah, it's several questions about what students can do around their own skill development. We've already touched on some of it. I want to bring that though to a point you discussed in a different conversation about the role your dad played in your son's development.
Yeah.
And fairly early on, because I think it does speak to that skill development and building it early. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So we lived about a mile and a quarter from my parents' house, and my dad wanted my kids to be over there so much he built like mirror sight rooms. So their bedroom in my parents' house was the same as their bedroom in our house, so they would feel like comfortable there. But he would pick up Ben from school, and he would take him home, and each day there was, just like he read the Wall Street Journal with me, he would do a math problem with Ben. And so Ben started at a very young age, like doing, I don't know, multiplying fractions, and then decimals, and then learning how squares work, and then the Apple grapher thing, and like all the other stuff that goes with it. So by the time he was like 6 or 7, he was done with Algebra 1. And Ben would tell you, he's not that smart. My son is not like a crazy genius in math. He's good, he's disciplined, he knows he can do the work. I doubt he's any smarter in math than any of you guys. But he just had great training from a very young age. And so then he got confident in it. And then what happened, the way you work, so he won the World Robotics Championship, and that's like a huge thing in Silicon Valley. And the only way you progress in robotics competitions is you get to go to higher and higher levels of complexity of robot and scarcity of resources to apply. So you have to really be good with power management, or the battery runs out in the middle and you get nuked and all the other stuff that goes with it. But Ben couldn't progress unless he had the math skills. And you take a math exam, and it's really easy to test someone's math acuity, right? It's a 40-question test, and you have to get 80% or 90% or better to pass. So they said, look, if you can't take a derivative and do this and this and this within this period of time, we can't bring you onto the robot team. So if you want to join the team, we'll happily take you. There's no age limit, but you got to pass the math test. So then he went running home to Grandpa, and like 2 whole summers were endless things of calculus textbooks. And he went at half the speed of a normal college kid, but like he was in 4th grade or 5th grade. And then that allowed him to then go to the next level and all the other stuff. And in fairness, that was in Silicon Valley. So all we had to do was go to Stanford every now and then, and you pay $40 an hour for a PhD in math who tutors your kid in calculus. Not that hard. I can't imagine you don't have that same opportunity around here. So, and now you have the internet too. So Khan Academy and all those guys are really good at doing that stuff. Super easy to do. So with my dad, basically he tutored Ben to get to this level, and then my dad started bringing in all the patents that he had in his head for what's coming the next 20, 25 years. And part of the reason I think all the military, DOD and CIA, NSA guys recruited him so hard is they had kind of Ben keeps my dad's brain. I was not smart enough to understand all that stuff, but my son was. And so partly the reason they all wanted him was because, he had a century of experience effectively in his brain looking at all this stuff. So
it's interesting, again, on the really early exposure to math. But what about the students who didn't have that? What can they do now? Can they make it up?
Sure, totally. Ben wanted to build the car. So think about like the AI equivalent of all this stuff. If you want to build a car, you got to start when you're 5 with math and all that. But you don't have to build a car to drive a car. And half the time, you make more money, have a better life, just driving the car and not worrying about building it. So you need to be good at math. Like my daughter's the other end of the curve. She's a lot more like me. I think she had through like Calc BC and maybe 1 class at Princeton, and that was it. And she, is one of the people running one of the hottest, AI GPU companies on the planet. And her math skills are modest. So you don't need it. But then you need other things, and she speaks 5 languages fluently. So, and they needed someone for all their international sales. So she speaks, Chinese, Arabic, Hebrew, and Spanish. And so, between that and I'd argue golf is kind of a language. And so it just made it really easy. So you have to have something else then if you're not amazing at math. If you are amazing at math, it kind of helps. But you got to have something else.
How important is golf, you think? We've talked a lot about
Yeah.
golf. 'Cause
Yeah.
We both like to play golf. You're much better than I am. But how important is golf?
It's really, really important. You don't have to be good. You have to be fast. You can't be horrible, but a bogey and change a hole is just fine. But if you don't play golf, you don't get invited to tons of things, certainly in Silicon Valley. And I live in Jackson Hole and in Scottsdale, and the golf is like a huge part of all the business that's done. So if you don't play, you're missing out on tons of good conversations that you should be having and lots of people to meet, let alone all the topical stuff. The Ryder Cup, we could go for hours. If we had enough beer, we could go for hours on what's going to happen in the Ryder Cup. So you lose all the corollary stuff that's so important in a career.
Yeah, so we were having this conversation not too long ago in class too, that even if you don't think you're interested, go take a lesson, be somewhat proficient so that if your company's having a scramble or something, you can show up and participate.
Totally, and a scramble is exactly it. So all you have to do is step up to the ball and hit a 7-iron 120 yards. That's kind of the delimiter. As long as you can do that somewhat consistently, you're fine. You don't have to be a good golfer, but you have to be a golfer.
And it is kind of a supercharger for relationship development.
Totally.
Not many other opportunities to spend 4 hours in a cart with someone.
That's right.
All right, we're nearing the end. I think we probably have time for just one more question or maybe two. What's been the most challenging or the hardest part of your journey to success?
God, these are like a therapist office. I think a little bit now, realizing I'm kind of coming into the 8th and 9th inning of my life. As you get older, you do change the way you think about things. Every morning I get up and I look in the mirror, and a 19-year-old looks in and this looks back. And it's a very different mindset as you're kind of as you're plating the food versus hunting it and then preparing it and cooking it and all the other stuff. So I'm in the plating era, and that has been a bit hard for me to digest as kind of the world turns and does things. If I could be around another 200 years, I'd love it, but I won't.
Unlikely.
Yeah.
Not impossible, I guess.
Yeah.
It depends on how
Never
quickly medical technology grows, right? But what do you expect the Siminoff legacy to be? Or what do you want it to be?
That's a good question. We're a really close but quiet family. Jamie is the only one who's pretty public, Shark Tank now and all that. The rest of us, I don't do things like this. Very, very rare. And I like being an orthodontist married to a school teacher kind of vibe. I love the privacy. I love not having to worry about things. So I don't think there will be an imprimatur of a Siminoff legacy that you'll tangibly know about. It'll just be lots of quiet relationships and small things that that we did along the way that ended up leading to hopefully really good things on the planet.
Terrific. I think that's a great note to end it on. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your responses to these questions, and we really appreciate you being here.
Good.
Thanks, David, for taking the time to spend with us, especially since you mentioned you don't do this often, so really appreciate that. And thanks, Nick, for catalyzing an awesome conversation. Thank you all for being here and spending some time with David and us. And I said I would forget to thank some people. I want to thank the foundation folks, IT, and many others who helped us make this happen. Dara at the back, we can't see, helping navigate the questions. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Is that okay?
Pretty painless.